Welcome back, y'all. Today's card starts with this new My Favorite Things stamp set called No One Stacks Up to You. Two that I'll be featuring in today's card, and it has quite a few sentiments. The sentiments include, I stand with you, I love being silly with you, you're such a supportive friend, life is better when we're together, and then the one that I'm using today, which is No One Stacks Up to You. I'm starting out with a piece of express blending card. It is cut with my die cut machine. I'm not sure who makes this die, but if I find one similar, I can link it down below. And of course, I grabbed my Memento Tuxedo Black ink and a stamping block. This one is from Fiskars. It's one of my favorites. And then I lay out the stamps on the blending card just to see what my image will look like. Initially, I wanted to put all 3 stacks of friends on this card, but then I realized that it was going to be a lot easier, if not visually pleasing, to just use the 2 stacks. So I went ahead and sat them down and kind of took a look at them, and then I get them all stamped up. And here I'm just fussing with the stamp and the paper a little bit to make sure that I understand exactly where I'm going to put this stamp. And then I grab my ink and get it all inked up. So here I notice that this little fox is missing a piece of his foot. And so I leave it, just assuming that I can fill in that little foot. And I'm going to put a sentiment on this card. So this kind of helped me decide that I'm going to put the sentiment on a separate piece of card and have it across the top of that image. So I went ahead and grabbed my pens, and this is where I kind of swatch out some of the colors to decide what I'm going to use. This does take me a few minutes, so I'll go ahead and chop it out right here. Now you'll notice that I start with a reddish brown color that is pretty dark. And for whatever reason, I start with the darkest color instead of the lightest color. And then you can see I have a heck of a time like blending out some of the color and getting it right. And it was just kind of a mess. And then I realized that I was going to put that sentiment strip here, so I worried about it a little less, but I still end up with just like a section of this card that is not my favorite. So we can speed through this part. Again, you see here that I grabbed my clear blending pen and tried to blend out some of that ink. It is so dark and so like red and brown that it did, I wouldn't say stain my blending pen, but it definitely left some ink on there, so. So I'm seeing now that it probably would have been best for me to color or to leave the little fox alone and let him dry a little bit before I went and put more ink on there. The point of saturation in the paper really kind of can impact the amount that your colors bleed and blend. So I just kind of went a little overboard here. Eventually I walk away from it and you'll see I go back to it later, but you see I'm just kind of staring at that section of the paper and just trying to figure out what to do. Full disclosure, at this point, I did consider starting over, but then I thought it would be good for me to just give it a go here and see if I could do anything else with it. Of course, my backup plan is also my plan A, which is I'm going to cover part of him with a sentiment anyway. So I figured I would just let it go at this point. And you see, as I move on, I try to get as far away from that fox as possible. So I went up and started coloring this tiny little turtle who is so cute. And the rest of it went pretty well. You'll see when I get to the rabbit, I put one color on him and then decide to make it a little darker, so I go back And here I really just wanted contrast between the animals and contrast within the animals, and then the pops of color that I put in at the very end for the clothes. So the hats, scarves, and the little sweaters. So here I just break out my bluish gray color. This color is really a dark gray, but has a lot of blue highlight in it, and it makes for some great shading. I can still get a lot of area where the color is darker than other areas, rather than using a basic black ink pen. Here I go in with the owl and just do a lighter light brown color. It really is in the yellow family, I think. And I really like the way it looks like it's a consistent color with just some highlights in different areas where the body shaping of the owl would be different. So once I'm done with my owl, I realize that this might be the color that I want on the rest of the fox. So even though I am still afraid of what is going on with the rest of the fox right now, I decide to color it in and act as if I love it. And it started to come together a little bit. You do see at the top of the fox's head where the hat is, the ears kind of just stick out of the hat, and there aren't definitive lines. So I ended up coloring the top of his hat the same color as his ears, which is something I'll deal with in just a few minutes here. I went ahead and added a super light gray to my penguin, thinking that he still has that dark body underneath. And penguins, when you look at them, you know, their white spots, they do just kind of soak up some of the color from the rest of their body. Then I ended up using the same color for my little rabbit, and even though I liked the way the rabbit looked overall, when I compared the bunny to the penguin, I kind of wanted a little more contrast, so I go back and cover the rest of him up with another color in just a second here. So here I go back in with one of my few Copic markers that I have in my collection. And I start with the inside of the ears, and then I start adding pink to the cheeks, and then I just go a little crazy adding pink to everyone's cheeks and giving them a little bit of a blush. So now I go in to color the polar bear, and of course he's already white, but in order to get contrast, you have to lay some color down. So I start with this color that I think is snow and lay some of that down. I figured that the feet would be, you know, dirty kind of all together. And then I just lay in some highlights and shadowing with that color. And then I went in with the blender and kind of blended those colors out a little bit. You see I add a little bit more on the head, not only where the rabbit is sitting, but also underneath his nose. And you can probably hear Cheese right now. She wants out of the room. And then I just blend in some of those other highlights with that Copic blending marker. So now I go in with this brownish yellow color. I think it's kind of like a super light mustard yellow, and it looks like it happens to also be a Copic marker. And I'm just laying down some color on top of the gray to give him a little more contrast. And I'm not sure that it looks great on screen here. It looks a little green, but really it is just kind of a brownish yellow in real life. So I liked the way that turned out. And then I move on to my bird. I decide I want a little red bird. I don't know if it's a cardinal. I don't know if cardinals are all red. I just decided that compared to all the colors that were already on my paper, red would spice things up a little bit. And so I did that. I tried a couple times to put like the smallest dot of that dark gray on the beak of that bird. And here you'll notice I've strategically placed my thumb over the fox's body to see what it's going to look like when that sentiment covers up that little blob of ink there. So then I go in and I color in the clothing. This is where I recognized that I colored the fox's head the color of the fur rather than the color of the hat. So I put some ink down and then I blend out a little bit of that color, and it turned out okay. So speeding up a little more now, I just lay some color down on these items of clothing and kind of try to get some colors in there that I didn't use on the rest of the image. There's really no blending in these parts. I just lay down some color. So here's the fun part, and really I don't have a lot of information to share about this part. I just put down a dark color on the lines that I figured would be darker, and then I colored everything else in with a color that would be lighter. And then I went in and made some shadows for both the polar bear and the fox, and it turned out pretty okay. A lot of the color of snow I learned from watching Sandy Allnock and just watching different artists on YouTube do their coloring and creating backgrounds for stamped images. So I put some snow in and some shadows, and then I just fill in the sky with a super light blue that I don't even really layer very much. I just make sure I get an even amount down. So now that my coloring is all done, I'm going to start with my card base. So I'm going to use an A2 size card that folds at the top. The background for my base is from this watercolor cardstock paper pad that is by Lawn Fawn. I don't know if this one is on the market currently, but if not, I will find something similar that is inexpensive that I can link below. Watercolor cardstock is great because it really is one color, but the wash of color adds interest without being too busy. So I picked out a color here. I didn't want green, I didn't want blue. Yellow seemed to be a bit too bright, so I went with this light violet purple color. I thought it offset really well, so I grabbed that one and I cut it down to 5 1/4 by 4 inches, and I put that down on the base. Here I did try a couple of different ideas for the sentiment for this card. I thought a circle would be nice to cover up a good amount of our fox, but then when I kind of placed it down there, even when I used a couple different colors, it seemed too big, and even though I like a lot of blank space, it just seemed like a little too much. So I decided to go with a strip of cardstock instead. So before I adhere my sentiment strip, I of course cut the end into a ribbon tail or fish tail. And I do that by slicing up the middle and then cutting towards that slice from each corner. And now I'm going to go in and make just a couple highlights with my white Jelly Roll pen. You can see that the light is coming from behind these guys. That's why the shadow is in front. So I figured that it didn't need a lot of white highlight. I just put it in a few of the places that I thought might be in the background of the image that might pick up a glare. So I'm not sure why, but I really love my Stardust Jelly Roll pen. So I went ahead and grabbed that one and just put a bunch of random dots around the page where I knew the image would not be covering up. Of course, I could have sliced the top of this off either before or after I glued it down, but I decided to just fold it over, and that I liked just the way it is. And now to cover up Mr. Fox. Not too bad. Thanks for taking time to join me for another video. The supplies I used in this card will be linked down below, including the new My Favorite Things stamp set and some watercolor background paper. If you have just a second, hit the thumbs up to like this video, and don't forget, safety first.